Добрий день, я вітаю всіх, хто
Hello, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Ukrainian Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. It's day 253 of our fight for freedom, and now we will be talking about the situation in Kherson region. We have Serhii Khlan, deputy of the Kherson Oblast Council, online with us. Hello, Mr. Serhii. Good afternoon. Kherson is Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Mr. Serhii, according to the recent information, we've seen that the occupants prohibited the movement of our citizens to the left bank of Dnieper. They talk about this in all their mass media. We also know that they plan the forcible eviction of people from Kakhovka region, and it's planned to take place on the 6th and 7th of November. What do you know about this? That's true. The occupants yesterday in the evening, they announced that the so-called evacuation is over, and they announced that the movement with the river transport is prohibited for private individuals. They announced it at once after our artillery's work on their positions on the river crossing by the military material, by the military boats near the Kherson bridge, which was moving the pontoon bridges, moving their material across the river. And after this powerful strike on their positions on the barges, so the occupants set up the crossing below the Antonevsky Bridge. After the powerful strike on these barges, they were unable for further use, and the occupants announced that everything stopped. But today in the morning, Stremousov, the collaborationist, wrote a message, wrote a post on his channel that everything is under control, but he ended with the phrase that the front line is still holding. He understands that soon it will be over. There are a few days, the final countdown, until the occupants are not able to hold the line. And he recorded a propaganda video where he called the people to go to the left bank. And very interesting what he proposes and the way he calls. And how is it going to happen if, since yesterday, the crossing of Dnieper with private transport is restricted, either with private boats or any private vessels. Still, he recorded this propaganda video. And it's significant that today the occupants removed their three-color rags from the building of the regional administration. As we remember, the so-called evacuation started with the evacuation of Russian ruble, and its circulation stopped from the first days of the so-called evacuation. And as of today, in Kherson itself and on the right bank part of the Kherson region, the circulation of ruble is stopped. No matter the threats of the collaborators to the small businesses, no one reacts to those threats. And following the Russian ruble, Russian battleship, the three-color rag went down. It was removed from all the administrations, from the administration's buildings, and we hope that soon we will see the Ukrainian banner on top of it. And next it will be the city of Kherson, and the liberation of left bank part of Dnieper region will follow. In the left bank, the occupants already announced the eviction. In Kakhovka and Nova Kakhovka, there are cars driving around with the loudspeakers, which announced that by the 7th of November, everybody should have gone from the city of Kakhovka. They say that Deportation will be organized. No one understands in what way, with what transfer, but they call the people to leave already now. They announced the forcible eviction from private residential areas in Kakhovka and Nova Kakhovka, which are close to the banks of Dnieper. First, this information was coming from Oleshki and Holopristan. And first of all, occupants started all these so-called eviction from residential areas there. Now the Russians, the military Russians dressed in civil clothes are dwelling in those residential areas now. They think that it will put them in safety, but they set up defense installation along the banks of Kakhovka water reservoir and Dnieper River. They moved the concrete cover installations set up along all the way of the left bank, along the bank of the Dnieper, reinforcing the fortifications, and they built new block posts. So it's total reinforcement of the left bank and fortification installations built there. Mr. Serhii, we have the information coming from local population that the occupants forcibly evict the people not only from the private residential areas but from many-story buildings, and the so-called mobilized personnel of the Russian army replaces the local population in their dwellings. Do you have information about that? I don't still have the information of the people being removed from from apartment blocks, but as to the private buildings, yes, we're talking about the left bank part of Kherson region in Holopristan and Oleshka. All the houses located closer to the banks of the river, the people were evicted from there, and the occupants took their place dressed in civil clothing. We had the similar information coming yesterday from Kakhovka and Nova Kakhovka. So the buildings, the houses located closer to the banks of the Dnieper, people get evicted from there. As to Holopristan, today there was information that our armed forces targeted the headquarters of the occupants. Do you know anything about this? Well, you know, I would rather wait for the official position of the armed forces of Ukraine, because everything looks very disputable there. It's true that the administrative building was hit today. Our armed forces don't work on the empty buildings, and that building was empty. Our armed forces don't work on the empty vacant police departments. So I think it's better to wait for some official confirmation to confirm that it's not a provocation by the occupants, the way they were doing it in Kherson to make people live in mass. So it's not the provocation of the Russians in Holopristan to provoke panic in there. Another piece of information that emerged in the social media is that the occupants detonate the cell communication towers. Yes, we can confirm this information. They blow the cell communication towers located closer to Berislav and the dam of Kakhovka hydraulic power plant. They do it on purpose to leave that part without cell communication, so people can get communication, and the occupants set up multiple crossings, pontoon crossings, they use for movement of their military material. So they destroyed those towers to impede the cell communication in those areas, so their material cannot be tracked. Your colleagues, dear colleagues, your questions. I'm curious, can we estimate the number of enemy of the personnel and material in the city of Kherson itself. We know that the occupants announced the creation of territorial defense forces, the occupant territorial defense forces, and they announced the numbers of like 1,500 personnel there. Do we know currently how many occupants was the number of their personnel in the city of Kherson itself, at least approximately? Thank you. It's hard to say what's the number of occupants in Kherson. We get different information about their numbers in the Kherson region in general, and now that there is a movement of personnel and material going on from right bank to the left bank, it's difficult to understand what's exactly the number. The local population reports that the number at first sight seems to decrease in the city of Kherson itself. So their concentration becomes lower. As to the voluntary territorial defense forces that was announced by the collaborationists, they said about the volunteer battalion named after Markelov, but it never went past announcements. When they were saying about the volunteer battalion, they announced the lists, but physically no battalions and no territorial defense forces were ever seen. And with the view of this urgent deportation of the civil population and total pillage in Kherson region, it's difficult to say that they can gather at least somebody somewhere, because the collaborationists flee, and those who are left with their pro-Ukrainian position, who wait for the Ukrainian armed forces to come, are still there. Yeah, may another question? Do we know any more detail about the Kherson Art Museum? Do you have any information about that? The art museum was pillaged and brought out. Everything was packed by the collaborationists, and everything was deported, and we don't know any direction it went to, right? Yes. Friends, any more questions? We don't have any more question in our studio. I want to thank you for joining our air. I will remind you we had Serhii Khlan with us, the deputy of Kherson Regional Council. So dear colleagues, our next event will be happening at 13 o'clock. I will remind you we have planned the opening of the photo exhibition Unconquered Cities of Ukraine. Bear with us.